What's going on, everyone? Today we'll be going through the G Perms. So unlike every other PLO, there's actually 4 different types of G Perms, and this makes them one of the more difficult PLOs to learn, especially for beginners. But in this video, I'll be going through the G Perms and making them really easy for you guys. As I said, 4 different types of G Perms, but we'll be starting with this one here, which is called the GA Perm, and the algorithm goes like this. The next one up is the GB Perm, and the algorithm is shown as follows. Following that is the GC Perm, which goes like this. And finally we have the GD Perm, which goes as follows. As always, if you're interested in some specific tips to memorize each of those algorithms, I'll put the timestamps to all of those in the video right here. I'll also include a lot more timestamps in the video description, so feel free to check those out. G-Perms are recognized based on a pair of headlights that I usually put on the left-hand side, and G-Perms also have a 2x1 bar somewhere on the other side. So in this case, we have a 2x1 bar on the front, which means that this is a GA Perm. So here we have another G Perm. It's also recognized by the headlights on the left-hand side, and the bar is on the right side near the back. So this is actually the GB Perm. Once again, if we hold headlights on the left side and we look for the 2x1 bar and it's at the back, this is the GC Perm. And as always, the headlights are once again on the left hand side and the 2x1 bar is on the right side but near the front. This is the GD Perm. So I personally use the RUD algorithms for the G Perms because I feel like these algorithms flow quite nicely. I'll put some alternative algorithms later on in the video if you're interested in those, but for now I'll be going through these algorithms, which is the ones I use. So the G Perm algorithms are really similar to one another, so they can quite easily be confused, which makes it quite difficult to learn, but I'll be breaking down each algorithm into small sections to hopefully help you guys remember them. So first up here we have the GA Perm, which is once again recognized by headlights on the left side and the 2x1 bar at the front. So the algorithm starts off with these 4 moves, R2, U, R'U, and so with G Perm algorithms, I don't really like just remembering the moves. Instead, I like to remember how my hands move, since the moves can look quite random. So with these moves, I like to think about regripping at the front here, doing the R2, followed by the U, R', and another U. Now at this stage, I like to sort of look at where the white stickers are, because I know that I have to sort of join them up before the end of the algorithm. So the next move, we have an R', U, R, U'. That's followed by an R2, which actually moves these 2 stickers on the bottom, so you can remember it that way. Next up, we have this fancy finger trick, which goes U', D. And then finally, you can think about inserting this pseudo F2L pair into this back slot the regular way, like this. And eventually just align the D layer like that. So going over the GA algorithm once again, just to make sure you've got everything. So starting off with a bit of a regrip, just to help you remember the first 4 moves. R2, U, R prime, U. And then continue on with the algorithm with an R prime, U prime, R, followed by another U prime. Next up, move these 2 white pieces all the way to the bottom with an R2, followed by the fancy U prime D. And then at the end, insert this pseudo F12 pair into this back slot, like so, and then align the D layer. So next up we have the GB algorithm. So going over recognition once again, headlights to the left, the single 2x1 bar is on the right side, but it's closer to the back. So this is the GB perm. The algorithm is actually the sort of inverse of the GA algorithm. The D moves can be moved slightly, so I usually do my algorithm with the D moves near the end. So starting off with R prime, U prime, R, so you can think about taking this back F12 pair out. So remember, for the GA algorithm, we ended by inserting this F12 pair. With the GB, we want to start by taking this F12 pair out. Next up, it's followed by the fancy U D prime. So it's going in this direction now. Next up, followed by an R2. So this is sort of similar to the start of the GA algorithm. So I also like to remember this with a bit of a regrip with the R2, U, R prime, U. And now this case, I like to think about trying to match the white colors up again. So starting off with the R, U prime, R, U prime. So you notice that I've matched up these white stickers up to form this 3x1 bar. And at this stage, the cube already kind of looks solved, so you can remember the moves, or you could just sort of match up the colors. Otherwise, you can think of it as R2 followed by a D, and that solves the GB perm. So once again, going over that again, just to make sure you got everything. So GB perm starts with it taking this F12 pair out and putting it into this position, like this, followed by the fancy U D prime with your right hand. And next up, starting with the R2, similar to the start of the GA perm, I like to remember it with a bit of a regrip just to help remember the next few moves. Finally, I like to think about matching these white stickers up with the next 4 moves. Once again, the white stickers are matched up. At the end here, we can just match up all the colors to finish off the algorithm. Here we have the GC perm. So once again, it's recognized by headlights on the left side, and you'll notice that the 2x1 bar is at the back. So as I said, GC perm. So this algorithm starts off with an R2. So instead of doing the R2 similar to the GA, I like to regrip the other way for this R2 and start the R2 by doing a backwards R2 like this. And I do that because it also helps me remember the next few moves. So following that, it's a U prime, R, U prime. Next up, we got R, U, R prime, U. And at this stage, once again, I like to look at the white stickers. So I want to think about moving these 2 stickers to the bottom with the R2. And now a bit of a regrip for the U D prime, similar to the GB algorithm with your right hand. And then think about inserting this pseudo F12 pair into the front. So similar to how you thought about inserting the F12 pair into the back for the GA perm, in this case, it's thinking about inserting this F12 pair into the front for the GC. And then finally, aligning the D move like with all G perms. So going over that again, it starts off with a regrip, but this time, once again, I like to regrip the other way. So doing sort of like an R2 prime instead of a regular R2. U prime, R, U prime. And next up, we got R, U, R prime, U. Think about moving these 2 white pieces to the bottom with the R2, followed by the U D prime. And then finally inserting this pseudo F12 pair into the front slot like that. And finally aligning the D layer. And that solves the GC perm. So we finally get to the GD perm. It's recognized by the headlights on the left, 2x1 bar on the right side, but this time it's near the front. So this is a GD perm. So this algorithm is slightly easier to remember, but it's also similar to the previous algorithms. So it starts off by taking this F12 pair out and putting it into this position, or you can remember it as the sexy move, sort of. So R, U, R prime to take this F12 pair out. And instead of just doing a U prime, instead we're doing a U prime and D at the same time with your left hand. So that's one way to remember it. Next up, we got the R2. So once again, with this R2, I like to remember it with a bit of a regrip, like so, followed by a U prime. For the next R, I like to just use my index finger to flick the R layer over like this, followed by yet another U prime. Finally, we got R prime, U, R prime, U. So those moves are fairly easy to remember. It's just R primes alternating with U moves, so they're all going in the same direction in that case. And at the very end here, we can just simply match up the colors since it's quite obvious where the colors go. Or you can remember it as R2 followed by D prime. So finally, going over that again quickly, starting off by taking this F12 pair out into this position, or you could think of it as sort of the sexy move. R, U, R prime. Now instead of just doing a U prime, remember we're doing the U prime D at the same time with your left hand, followed by an R2. So this regrip is similar to that of the GA and the GB, so a bit of a regrip before the R2. That helps you remember the next few moves, which is U prime, R, U prime. The next few moves I like to just remember because they're quite easy to remember. It's R prime, U, R prime, U, so it's just R primes alternating with U moves, so once again quite easy to remember. And then finally just match up the colors because at this stage it should be quite obvious where the colors go. R2 followed by D prime, and there you've solved the GD perm. So there's not really any secrets in memorizing the G perms other than just drilling the algorithms and getting very used to it. If you ask me now to write down the letters for each of the G Perm algorithms, I probably couldn't because I don't remember the letters, not like learning a T Perm or a J Perm where you could say out the letters off by heart. With G Perms, there's no way I could tell you what the specific moves are, but if you just gave me a cube, I could definitely do it pretty quickly. And that's because I've just got it into muscle memory after drilling the algorithms over and over again. So that's how I learnt the G Perms, and that's what I would recommend. Just knowing how your hands move on the cube, that's all you need to know. Because the letters are quite random, and to be honest, they're really difficult to just remember. So instead, I think an easier way to remember them is once again just drilling the algorithms over and over again until they're in muscle memory. And so at the end, you shouldn't need to even think about it. You should automatically be able to just do these algorithms off by heart. So one of the more fancier finger tricks found in G Perms is the simultaneous U and D moves, which can be done with both your hands like this. These finger tricks aren't actually that hard to do. With just a little bit of practice, you should be able to do these quite naturally. They just look really fancy because if you haven't learnt the G Perms before, there's not really any use case for it. But they will take a little bit of getting used to, but after you get used to it, they should be quite natural. I just wanted to mention them because once again, if you haven't learnt the G Perm before, you probably never used finger tricks like this before. So because these G Perms require a lot of U and D moves, it's good to know multiple ways to do such U and D moves. So one of the finger tricks I go over plenty of times in my previous PLL videos is the U pinch move. That will be really important for the G Perms because otherwise you'll have to regrip a lot if you don't do the pinch move. So I would definitely recommend that. Also try to know how to do U moves with both hands. So not only the flicks, but the pushes as well. Or you can use your finger to drag the U layer over as well. That also works. And definitely know the same for the D moves as well. So not only D flicks, but also D pushes. So similar to the pushes in the E Perm, these will be important. So an example of an algorithm that uses both of those would be a GD Perm, which uses quite a lot of fancy finger tricks, but if you do them properly, the GD Perm can actually be done very quickly. So it starts off with a bit of a regrip, which is fine. But you'll notice here, I'll have to use my index finger on my left hand to push the U layer over. And at the end here, I'll need to use my ring finger on my left hand to do the final D prime. So those finger tricks definitely come in handy, not only in this algorithm, but in many of the G Perm algorithms. So one more example of using those finger tricks in an algorithm would actually be the GC Perm. So once again, with this algorithm, I like to start with a bit of a regrip just to help me remember the next few moves. And so you notice here, I'll have to do another U move. And so if I wanted to do it the regular way, I'll have to regrip before doing that R move. But instead, if I did the pinch move, you'll notice that I don't have to regrip and I could just continue the algorithm like so. So those pinch moves can save you regrips during the algorithm, so that will make the algorithm flow a lot nicer as well. So you may have noticed that for all the algorithms that I use, I always do a little bit of a regrip before the start of the algorithm. And I mentioned before that it's not optimal to regrip before an algorithm, but I do it for G Perms because after doing the initial regrip, the rest of the algorithm will flow even better than if I tried to do the whole thing regripless. So sometimes you gotta weigh up the pros and cons. So if I try to start the algorithm without a regrip, maybe I might have to do a really fancy finger trick halfway through, which might actually end up slowing the algorithm down even more than if I just did a regrip at the start. So I like to just do a regrip at the start because G Perms do take some time to recognize anyway. So as I recognize it, I just do the regrip and it really doesn't take up that much time. And that way I can use more traditional finger tricks throughout the algorithm, which makes it flow a lot nicer. So I end up being a lot more consistent with these algorithms. But once again, you can experiment with your own finger tricks. Everyone does slightly different finger tricks for the G Perms because there is that flexibility with these algorithms. The finger tricks that I use might just give you an idea of what these might look like. But once again, you guys can experiment with your own finger tricks as well. And yeah, just use the ones that you're comfortable with and that you're consistent with. So as I mentioned earlier, I use the RUD algorithms, as you probably can tell by now. But there are alternative algorithms. One of the other set of algorithms that are quite popular are these algorithms with the wide U moves. I personally don't use these. I've never used these before, but I know a lot of people who have used these and they use these algorithms as their main. So if you're not a big fan of the RUD algorithms, then I do suggest you try out these wide U moves. I personally like the RUD ones because there's no rotations involved. As you notice with these algorithms, you'll have to rotate halfway through. Each cube rotation is actually 2 regrips, so I'd rather not rotate during an algorithm. But yeah, if you're interested, I'll leave these in the description as well, along with the algorithms that I've mentioned early on in the video. So feel free to check those out and just use the algorithms that you like and that you're consistent with. So as always, ending off with a bit of an AUF tip for G Perms. It's not really a tip because AUF for G Perms is actually quite easy and it's always just recognizing the headlights. So I want to say that if you use the RUD algorithms, at least, it's always going to be recognized by the headlights. But if you use the G Perms, which use the wide U moves, then it's actually the 2x1 bar. So it depends on which algorithms you use, but for the ones that I showed in this video, it's usually looking at the headlights. So in this case, we have a GA Perm, but it doesn't really matter which G Perm it is, they all have the same recognition technique. With this algorithm, we'll notice that the headlights match that side color, so that means there's no AUF at the end. So going over one more example with a GC Perm. Yep, GC Perm, because bar at the back. Headlights are on a blue side, but they're green headlights, which mean they belong on the opposite side. So this is actually a U2 AUF. With this case, we'll have to do a U2 after the algorithm to solve the cube completely. Alright, so that's it for this G Perm tutorial. If you have any questions about anything in this video, feel free to let me know in the comment section and I'll try my best to answer all of them. Like the video if you learnt something new, please subscribe if you want to see more similar videos, and please consider sharing these videos with people you know who are learning full PLO or who plan to learn full PLO. That would definitely help grow the channel. I appreciate everyone's support. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.